loaded. Truth on my blade, every line's exploded. You swing your words, I counter with precision. Battle of reason, this is my mission. Raise your fist, let them know. Go. Raise your voice, let it blow. Woo! We clash our swords of reason. Cut through like no retreating. Yeah. No fear, no chain, no treason. Woo! We clash our swords of reason. We clash our swords of reason. Cut through like no retreating. Yeah. No fear, no chain, no treason. Woo! We clash our swords of reason.
All right, welcome everybody to another Sword of Reason right here on the SpeakeaZy show. Today's debate prompt is we should expand towards a global government. And for today's debaters, for the affirmative, we have Vigilante TV, has a channel right here on YouTube where he focuses on politics and gaming. And then for the negative, we have Rob Noor, who also has a channel here on YouTube where he's destroying the establishment corruption and is a conservative commentator and debater. Vigilante, you're getting the opening, so whenever you're ready, we'll start the timer up, and you can go ahead.
All right. By the way, I mostly stream on Twitch. I'm also live on Twitch right now. So let me start by defining what I mean when we talk about a world government. The way that I would want to set it up is effectively a mix between how the United States is set up and how the EU is set up. I would want us to have a global parliament that is a multi-party democracy with equal representation per country based off of state or population. Like America and the EU, I would want us to have an executive branch and a judicial branch. That judicial branch I would want to turn the ICC into. I would want us to turn Interpol into effectively the global police. Now, where the American side comes into it, I would want states to have shared sovereignty with a federal government. Basically how the United States is set up now, where states have their own slight independence, but the federal government has priority and still holds the majority of power. Now, some things that we would be able to fix with the creation of a world government, a few economic issues that arise from the current status quo, currency risk being a big one. This is the exchange rate between currencies. Having multiple currencies globally creates risk for corporations and individuals who do business outside of their home country. If a foreign currency devalues faster than the American dollar when corporations bring money back to America, to the American dollar, they do lose money. Going to a single global currency solves this issue because there's no longer need to transfer currencies between countries. Another issue that arises is taxation. Corporations and individuals can keep money offshore and use that to avoid paying taxes. A global governmental system would massively simplify taxation and prevent safe havens that allow for taxes to be avoided. We can have better organized crisis response for public health crises like COVID or the Ebola crisis, things like that. There would be no need for countries to fight over how much of a medication or vaccine each country gets. We could standardize environmental protections worldwide. No need to have unenforceable treaties like the Paris Climate Agreement when we can apply the rules worldwide. Realistically, the only way we ideally have a chance to ever end idealistic things like world hunger or have world peace is via a world government. I say this because we would have the ability to rapidly industrialize non-industrialized world like most of Africa and parts of South America and then we would also be able to have a worldwide defense force which would be able to be used to shut down things like terrorist organizations in the Middle East, and stop things like the current Eastern European conflicts that we have sprouting up. One of the biggest problems we currently have when striving for world peace in particular is that the ICC is effectively toothless. It can issue warrants for people like Putin, Bibi Netanyahu, Kim Jong-un, or literally anybody who violates international law, but it cannot do anything to actually enforce those warrants. speaking of international law, we would be able to standardize the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So it's not just a worthless PR piece put out by the UN. We could actually end slavery and child labor that is still used in certain parts of the world and stop governments that are currently violating human rights. And then immigration, which I know is the most controversial topic when it comes to global policy. We would be able to use freedom of movement, just like we do here in the United States and just like they do in the EU. I would want there to be freedom of movement, which would allow people across the globe to go to where there are better job opportunities. Like if you're in tech, Japan is obviously the tech center of the world right now. A lot of medical research is done in China. We would want people to be able to go to China who will specifically do medical research. That way we can get all of the greatest minds in the same area. That way things and technology rapidly expand. And then lastly, you might be thinking, what about crime? Because crime would be an issue, obviously, with a global government. Well, there would no longer be independent governments, which means there would no longer be a diplomatic crisis for punishing criminals in certain states. A great example of this is like the issue with the leader of WikiLeaks, how he's like unable to be prosecuted. That wouldn't be an issue anymore. You wouldn't have states like Cuba that have are extradition safe havens for criminals. And with that, I cede my time.
All right. Thank you for that, Vigilante. And with this, we'll give the mic over to Rob Noor. And whenever you're ready, I'll start the timer up when you start going.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, SpeakeaZy, for hosting this. Thank you, Vigilante, for coming. I think it's going to be a fun debate. It's a topic that I'm interested in, and I think that one that's increasingly important in our world today as we become more interconnected than at any time in the past through use of technology. And so there's going to be default positions as to whether or not we should have sort of a government that positions more towards sort of a globalist mindset. Of course, the topic that I will be negating is that we should advance towards a global government, and I welcome Vigilante for giving specifically what that means to him. So I will choose to negate the specific proposition that he gave and his definition of what globalism will do. And hopefully that gets us out of the semantic argument that much as to what we mean exactly by globalism. So I accept sort of the exact plan that you put forth through globalism, and will argue why I think that would be a bad thing. There are three areas that I would like to start with my opening statement as to why I think that an advance towards globalism would be something that we should reject. Now, the first argument is going to be that that this would lead to a lack of cohesion. And the problem is that the world is a vast, vast place with far different values. And the truth is, even though I think that I'm not a cultural relativist and my value system, one of being a Christian, one of being someone who prioritizes the founding fathers in this country and the Bill of Rights and our Constitution, although I think that is the culture that we should all strive to be, the truth is the rest of the world is not ready to have that enforced upon them. There are often countries around the world that have such a different, vast culture, and that they're happy with that culture, that if we were to try to enforce our way of life upon them, it would lead to a lack of cohesion because we have so much of a cultural divide that there would be nothing that would be able to effectively have cohesion. This means because there would be no commonality between us, what in the world would be the collective that we would have under one government, the same government and representation, if we said we are against female genital mutilation, but for whatever reason, 51% of the world says, no, we're for it. We would then have to accept that as the world of the law of the world, because there are people with have a vastly different culture than us that would say that we have to do that. And you may say, fine, that may be the case with countries that are the third world, but we would outnumber them. Okay, well, how will we enforce our values on these countries? Through the sword? Are we really going to send world military people into countries that don't share our values, even if it's against overwhelmingly what the domestic population believes? Presumably, the way my opponent outlines this was it would be similar to the United States government, that we have state laws, but you would also have federal laws. Well, these things, most of them would be enshrined in federal law. For example, in the United States, the federal law would say that mutilating women in a manner such like that is something that we would never find acceptable. So there's no way that a state, or in this case, a country that's now just in effect the state of the world government, would be able to say, no, we want to do that at the state level. No, these things would be enshrined by federal law, which would mean that this would default lead to military incursions in many countries around the world that were unwilling to accept the values of the West. And that's just if you accept the West would win out, would it? Or would values of places like China, India, and other populous countries that maybe have far different effects on what they think should happen in many of what we consider a liberal society are actually moral failings? Perhaps they wouldn't be so generous to women's rights, or to LGBT rights, or to rights that many people in the West think are important, such as free speech rights, the right to self-defense, etc. And even if you would say that somehow a coalition of the Western values would be able to win out, the real question remains, what are those coalition of values? For example, over 12,000 people last year alone were locked up in the UK for speech that they had on social media. The values that make the United States great are largely unique to the United States. The First and Second Amendment are 1 and 2 for a reason. The right to free speech and free association, the right to self-defense, these aren't characteristics that are common amongst much of the countries around the world. And I'm not too sure that we should be so readily giving those up and say that we accept world masters from people that have never been to our country and don't share our values. The second problem with the transition to globalism would be as follows. The people that would be leading that transition are not moral, benevolent people. Hell, they're not even competent people. The truth is we are marching inexorably towards globalism. People in positions of power across the world in economic industries, cultural industries, and political places absolutely want an end to the nation state. They see as the biggest impediment to their goal of sort of a one world government, self-sufficient people that don't rely on the government in the middle class in the Western world. These people are a stumbling block. What big corporations want is to have one set of laws and rules so that they can become mini countries and on their own. We already see that many corporations in the United States, for example, such as Microsoft, if you just took how much money they're worth, would be 14th, 15th in GDP across the world if they were their own country. These companies do not want to operate under individual countries' laws. What better way to entrench power within them and with the money and with the haves to just have a one world system, which means that the domestic population's concerns would never be addressed. Instead, the exceedingly wealthy would entrench a neo-feudalist society, which would mean the will of the people back home would not matter. All that would matter would be what people in these government bodies, probably centralized somewhere like Europe, had to say. We can see a mini example of this in the EU. Oftentimes, countries that make up the EU have non-votes from people in Brussels that tell them how they have to live their life. This has led to all sorts of things like migration coming into countries, even when the majority of the domestic population doesn't want it. But the will of the people is no longer heard. One of the greatest things about the United States system is that our federalist system, which is capable at a national level but not a world level, means that we can have local governments that's closer to us. And it's cliche but true that your local government probably has more of effect on your life than the federal government. However, if we make all of these decisions federally, and instead of the United States, which certainly there's a problem with social cohesion, but nowhere near what it would be if the entire world's under one government, if we can see that the more localized government's more effective here, that certainly would be the truth when it has localized governments around the world with disparate populations. However, if we're under one federal system and the federal government in a place like Brussels is able to control what you do both in the United States, China, South Africa, Somalia, Japan, and the United Kingdom, then the average will of the people in these very disparate places with disparate cultures will no longer be heard. It'll be corruption on steroids. It'll be the haves and the have-nots. It'll be neo-feudalism. Only those with money and influence will have a voice, and the rest of us will be plebes that will dine at the scrap table, hoping that the lords throw us something as we further and further become not individuals, but cogs in a machine that could be thrown around the world to be told, and as you heard my opponent say, oh, we think you'd be better in this industry over here in Brazil, then we'll uproot you. Who cares about your culture? Who cares about your connection to the land? The third reason that this would be bad is that the transition itself would lead to World War III. Even if in theory you can say in a utopian mindset, would it be good to approach a globalist system or not? And I've given the arguments as to why that wouldn't be the case. Even if it was possible, there is zero chance that a country like China or many other countries around the world would accept a coalition of Western values coming together and saying that they have to join, or that China has to join with them to have a one world government. This would inexorably lead to power factions that would separate, and we would have almost sort of like an Axis and Allies type situation, which would lead to World War III. Unlike what we saw in World War II, there are so many countries with nuclear weapons at this point that this would probably be the final war. This means we would never get to a utopia where people could freely move where they wanted around the world, crime is solved by a one world police, and that we would have all of these things like the ability to fight climate change, etc. These tyrants that run things are greedy. They're not going to allow this to occur and say that, nope, we're willing to cede power. Us people in China are willing to cede to folks in Brussels. This will ensure that there will be perpetual conflict that would never be able to be solved. The last thing that I'll say that goes with the 3 points that I was making here is all of the solvency that you would see from my opponent saying he would be able to solve all of these harms, we'd solve crime, we'd solve sort of the differences of people, etc., would be impossible. All you're doing is replacing the conflicts that you would have between nation states, the conflicts you would have between states. You would still have vast differences. We can see historically examples when we've had similar types of experiences where you've had countries come together to form broad alliances that there's been all sorts of strife. Look at the human rights abuses under the Soviet Union. Look what the Bolsheviks did. Look at the tyranny that exemplified there within. Even if we can have some sort of no more wars between states, what would the cost be? 1984? Brave New World? Think of the rights that would be trampled on in the name of, you can't be an individual. You're no longer welcome to your own culture. You have to be monolithic. You all have to meld in some great melting pot, only you don't get a say in it. You know who gets a say? Those that are powerful enough to win the global government games. They'll tell you how you must live your life. They'll tell you that your ancestry and the way that you've lived your life going back centuries, your particular religion, your particular customs, all of those are no longer acceptable in a global government because 51% of the people in the world say that that's the case. If you think that there is tyranny right now in national governments that we see across the globe, which I do, globalism is a nightmare. As George Orwell put it, if you want to think of what the future holds, and I'll add this in the future of globalism, think of a boot stamping on a human face forever. That's my opening statement.
All right. Thank you for that, Rob. And now we'll get into the 5-minute uninterrupted rebuttals. Just a reminder to everyone in the chat, the Q&A is there. If you guys want to get your questions in, put your questions in. We have a 30-minute Q&A section at the end, and the super chats will get priority for that. But I'm going to hand it over to you, Vigilante, for your 5-minute uninterrupted rebuttal. And whenever you start talking, I'll start the timer with you. And again, thank you both for being here.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with individual constitutions. Much like the way that we have the United States set up, we would be able to have individual constitutions that where the federal government would have its constitution, and then each individual state would have its own constitution, and that would solve some of the cultural cohesion issues that you were talking about. As far as corporate power, realistically speaking, we would actually be able to curb corporate power more on a global government than we do currently, because the majority of the world has a lot stronger rules when it comes to corporations. You were also talking about how certain areas would have more of a say. Actually, realistically, the areas that would have the most say are the United States and China, because we have the vast majority of the world's population. And as I was talking about, I would want the representation to be population-based. Yeah, those are the main rebuttals that I have for you for now.
Okay. So with that, then we'll hand it back to Rob for his 5-minute uninterrupted rebuttal. And Rob, whenever you're ready, I'll start it up.
First off, I hit a message on my screen. It was in no way, if you go back and watch my stream, intended for you, Vigilante. I bumped a message. It said, "You're not the guy, pal." That was not my intent.
No, you're
good. I'll start with your rebuttal. Real quick, you said that there would be individual constitutions like state constitutions of the United States. Name me one state constitution you're familiar with. The truth is, these state constitutions are oftentimes very neutered. In fact, we can see right now that there's a big flash in the United States where the federal government is saying, no, the state constitution by no way, shape, or form means that you can control things like federal migration. So you don't know any of the state constitutions, and neither do I. And I follow this state stuff, particularly in Pennsylvania, quite fluently. The key is the federal laws would be the things that would shape these, and you know it, and so do I. You said that we would be able to curb corporate power. That's not true. Just like in the United States, when we have national election, these corporations have undue influence because they have more power and money to be able to win these races. That certainly would be even more true, and the stakes would be even higher in a world government. And we can see that places like Brussels right now in the EU are incredibly corrupt. And we can even see things like FIFA and other places that are international organizations, the corruption that flows there through money. So these corporations would find a way at the helm of all of these governments, and we would all be in a worse place. You say the United States has more population. It pales in comparison to a place like China. The United States maybe has 350 million people. What's the global population? 6 billion? The United States' influence would go from being the most important and powerful country in the world right now, which I think has the best culture, to be, 300 million out of 6 billion and change? Our power would wane overnight, and it would be a disaster. Some of the things that you said would be beneficial in your original opening statement that I would like to talk about. You said multiple currencies are bad. No, we can see that multiple currencies are okay because the United States has been the reserve currency and it's made the world incredibly rich. In addition, you're not going to be able to solve this because things like Bitcoin would be inevitable. And if you have one currency, inevitably, power abhors a vacuum. You're going to have something that shows up that's going to be the counterbalance to that. So you're still going to have multiple currencies, except they're going to be unregulated like Bitcoin anyways. You say that taxes go offshore. However, the problem with taxes would be I would be spending a lot of taxes and I would never see a return on that investment because we would now be forced to take taxes from the United States and put them into poor areas like those in sub-Saharan Africa, which means that I would get more and more upset and that I'm being more and more productive and I'm not seeing a return on my investment. You cannot argue that the wealth of the United States would decline precipitously because our taxes that we would pay in would overwhelmingly go to other areas of the world and we would not get the benefit out that we see put in. You talk about things like climate change. I think that climate change is a joke and it's a scam largely. It is true that the climate's changing. However, there is no consensus. And this would certainly be used to scam even more. Plus, the places where there's huge population centers like China and India that rely on cheap fuel would by no means accept robust climate change plans. This would probably mean, from your perspective, there would be less climate change laws. Then you say that we'd be able to fight disease, but actually that would be worse. That unfettered migration would mean that there would be more diseases that would spread, and there'd certainly be a lot of countries, probably more than 51% of the people in the world, that would not accept the vaccines, etc., that the United States offer. We already see that they refuse to accept the United States meat, many of these countries, because they think it's genetically modified. This could mean that the net cause would be that diseases would go up, and as you move populations around, you would see people that have different sort of immunities, etc., naturally, now would be bringing diseases all across the world. So I actually think diseases would get worse. You talk how it would help world hunger. I don't think that's the case. I think it would make things worse because it would make the most productive country much poorer. You say that it would industrialize the third world. How would we do that? We tried to in places like Afghanistan and it ended up in an unmitigated disaster. And guess what happened? We ended up leaving it 20 years later after spending trillions of dollars. And the people are just as bad, if not worse off, because the people that fought for democracy and modernization were all put to the sword. We can see the same thing in places like Syria and Libya. You say there'd be a world defense force. I say that would be it would be untenable anyways. It would be no different than the UN. If you have a national military, you would just have people that would pop up that would be ineffectual as sort of national militaries. There are world militaries that we would see today, such as the UN's fighting force. You would still see all of these countries not have cohesion. And instead of calling it this country goes to war with this country, it would be this sectarian violence goes to war with this sectarian violence. You say that international warrants would be good and that we would have a universal declaration of human rights, says you. I don't think the UN Declaration of Human Rights would survive a place like China that would now have billions of votes that would say we don't agree with those human rights. The same would be true of many other countries. So it's a crapshoot. And even if you could enforce a universal declaration of human rights, you have no evidence whatsoever that strong lords in places like China or Africa would accept this without a fight. You haven't answered the fact that this would lead a transition to World War III. There's not really been an answer to it. You say that you would be for free movement. This is further proof that people would not like this system. The truth is, as much as I don't want someone from Somalia living next to me, someone from Somalia doesn't like someone like me moving next to them. This would root people away from their ancestral homes. It would mingle culture in ways that wouldn't be tenable. It would ruin social cohesion, and it would lead to a more violent and disgusting place all around the world.
All righty. Thank you for that, Rob. And again, thank you for everyone for joining. Again, reminder, get your questions in. We have a 30-minute Q&A at the end. Super chat questions get priority. We're going to move now into the 1 hour of open floor where they can where the debaters can cross-examine each other. So I'm going to bring up the timer here. Again, thank you to both debaters for showing up. Great openings from both of you. So whenever whoever wants to take it first, whenever that starts, I'll start the timer up for you guys.
Vigilante, can I ask you, like, this will seem not related, but I think we can see how this will get us to where we are. Forget about switching to a global system. How would you identify yourself politically as like a citizen of the United States? Like, are you a socialist? Are you like just sort of a central Democrat? Are you Republican? Like, what's sort of your political philosophy?
I am what you would refer to as a market socialist.
A market. So, do you think that ideology would win out in a global government?
To a degree, I think we would end up, for the most part, some form of social democracy. Considering the vast majority of the developed world are social democracies.
Are there more people in the developed world or the undeveloped world? In other words, the first world, we would say, right? Are there more people in the first world than there are outside? I actually don't know. I'm asking you.
So when we talk about the developed world, we're talking mostly about Europe, Asia, or parts of Asia, parts of South America,
Well,
and then obviously America. So I would say, yeah, there's more population in the developed world than there is the undeveloped world.
I don't think that's, first off, I think you have a category error there. I don't think, if you're going to say that most of the world is sort of social democracies or the developed world socialist, I don't think you could add India and China there. Right? You can't add those Asian countries. They're not what we would consider social democracies. You would acknowledge that, right?
China, definitely not. China is it's in the state capitalism phase of communism. But India has social democratic elements. Fuck, even Israel has social democratic elements to it. The majority of even remotely developed nations have certain social democratic elements to it, like universal health care, free college, etc.
So according to what I'm looking at, like through UN definitions, roughly the global population is about 8.2 billion, right? Now they define sort of first world countries, or the way they type it is like developed countries. They define that as follows: high income, highly developed economies. Examples of these would include the United States, Japan, Germany, UK, Canada, Australia. Now, this wouldn't include places like India, and it wouldn't include places like China, right? Do you want to take a guess on what the population of the first world or developed countries are? It's 1.3 billion. That means the rest of the world is 6.9 billion. That leaves us with a total of 16% of the developed world.
Well,
that's the population, 16%.
Me and them are using a slightly different definition.
Okay, that's fair.
When I'm talking about developed countries, I'm mostly talking about industrialized countries. So India and China would count in my definition.
But even if we, so I don't think that you could make the claim that China is like a market socialist country. It's just not. You would agree with that?
No, I mean even China has social democratic elements to it, but it is by nature a communist country that is in the state capitalism phase.
Okay,
which state capitalism, to be clear, is effectively a authoritarian version of social democracy.
Okay, well, let's try different tech. Then I guess the parts that would matter would be like social policy and social democracies. Let's start there, because presumably the economic policy would be sort of changed dramatically anyways, because it's a one world government. So let's forget about economic policy for a second in the one world government. Let's talk about the social policy. Gay rights. They exist in your government?
I would say anti-discrimination laws in general would pretty much exist.
How would that be? What if 51% of the people said no?
I mean, that would be something that we would have to bake into the Constitution.
Okay, then who gets to decide the Constitution?
Just like we do here in the United States. It would have to be something that each country votes on in order for us to establish the government. Or the way that I realistically think that a one world government would have to happen is it would have to start with the United States, Canada, like basically North America, and then Europe, and then branch out to certain areas of Asia, and then bring in and also certain areas of South America, and then bring in the non-industrialized world after that. That's the only way that it's going to work, especially because there is the cohesion issue that you mentioned, where we would have to combat the issues of like the Middle East. Like the Middle East is like the biggest problem with developing a global government is literally going to be the Middle East, because not necessarily the people there, because a lot of the people there actually do want like women's rights and things like that. We see that with the protests in Iran, where they had that massive fucking protest over the one chick being killed. I don't remember her name, unfortunately. But the governments in particular and the radical Muslim groups would be the issue.
I promise we'll get to women's rights in a second. And I see what you're saying, and I promise I'll address it. But I want to get one more ground fact before we get there. Let's just take gay rights for a second. Presumably something you're for, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you think that more than 51% of the population of the world supports gay rights?
I would say it's probably close to 50%.
No, I don't think it's that close. I think a lot of other countries around the world play. I don't think, even if you could make the argument that like, well, I think the average person in China is not too happy with their system. Culturally, they're far afield of a sort of what we would accept in what you would probably like as progressivism when it comes to LGBT issues.
No, China's actually a bad example there, because China actually very recently, and so did Cuba, established gay rights and trans rights as part of their laws. Actually, Cuba in particular actually established it as part of their constitution.
Now, I think my gut feeling tells me it's going to be very difficult to find sort of studies on this. I think it's going to be very difficult because I don't know exactly how you would be able to do this. But my guess is that most of the world would be far more hardline on gay rights, LGBT rights, particularly as they might be like, sure, we're not stoning gay people. And maybe they would even be for some form of like gay marriage. But when it comes to a lot of the rights that we see for sort of LGBT rights that gets more into closer what you probably would accept is wanting maybe more trans issues and things like that, they're not going to accept that. You at least agree with that, right?
I'm just going to be blunt on this one, and a lot of leftists will not like me for this. The biggest issue is going to be the Muslim countries. When it comes to that.
But nonetheless, I think even aside from I mean, I guess we'll just make it undeniable so that a place that everyone will accept that I think that where there's some sense of agreement. Are you for trans rights, like as we see them in the United States as they're pushed? Like,
yes, for the most part.
would you say it would be a human rights abuse to say something like trans women, so a male transitioning to female, should not be allowed to use a restroom designed for biological females?
That issue is actually, for the most part, uniquely an American issue. The most European countries don't have gendered bathrooms.
Well, but they would have spaces specifically, whether it be bathrooms or not, specifically for biological males and females. You would agree with that?
Well, they use unisex bathrooms.
Okay, but even if not bathroom, they would have certain spaces, certain organizations, areas.
I mean, if you're talking like locker rooms, stuff like that. Yeah, there would be that issue to an extent.
So I know this seems like a fringe issue, but I'll get to why it's important in a second. Do you feel that would be against the rights of trans people to tell a biological male that transitioned to female that they couldn't go in those female spaces?
I do, as long as they're actually transitioned.
Sure, it's not someone faking; it's someone that's actually trying through the process of, taking the proper medical procedures. Okay, fine. You do realize there's 0% chance that shit flies in a global world. There's just no way that more than 50% of the people buy that. I mean, there's probably not, it's probably an 80-20 issue against that in the United States, let alone if you get to places like China. Right?
I don't think it's an 80-20 issue in the United States. But it's you're right that in like at least in the bathrooms aspect of it and maybe the locker rooms aspect of it, there's at least right now there's more of a favor towards.
Okay, so you're fine with that, with the global government saying, "Yep, that trans stuff's bullshit." You'd be fine with that?
I would be okay with just doing anti-discrimination laws like what we see in the United States, where it is you can't discriminate people in like housing, job opportunities, things like that.
Okay. Well, first off, you are wearing, like, oftentimes it's Democrats that are actually trying to revoke that. For example, there's a proposition that was passed years ago in California that said that you're not allowed to have preferential or discriminatory treatment when it comes to hiring practices based on race, gender, etc. And Democrats want that overturned because they realize that screws up affirmative action. So just to be clear, it's not about the globalism debate, but you're against that, right? You'd say affirmative action's shit.
I'm actually not necessarily for affirmative action. Okay. I am the more economic focused type of socialist. I think social issues, for the most part, are a secondary issue that would mostly be solved by focusing on economic issues.
I don't think so, and let me tell you why. So I think I'm making the point that I'm trying to make with the trans issues, with the LGBT issues, even with women's rights and other things. I don't think it's as clear-cut as you think that the rest of the world will just say, yes, even though currently the countries we live in are far afield from what progressives like in the United States and the Western world will happily accept it, even though they're only about 19% of the global population. I think that there's two possibilities. If you make this as democratic as possible, then this globalist system's actually going to come much closer to my social wants than yours, and then I don't know how you accept that. And it seems that you try to get out of that by saying, well, it's because we'll enshrine it into some sort of global constitution. But that would be anti-democratic. And then the question is, how will you coerce people to accept it? Through point of a gun? It'll be illegal for them not to accept something that the vast majority of them don't want?
So, like I said, the main issue that I see when it comes to the cohesion part of things is the Islamic countries. And I'm going to be blunt, whenever it comes to the Islamic countries, especially the Islamic governments, yeah, for the most part, I think we would have to take care of the current system of Islamic governments at the point of a gun, especially when it comes to Iran, when it comes to Afghanistan, when it comes to Saudi Arabia. I actually like, somewhat off topic, but like the fact that Saudi Arabia keeps buying into things in America, like they just bought EA, they've bought into fucking the WWE and a bunch of shit, pisses me the fuck off because of what Saudi Arabia is.
Okay, but first off, I think you mistake that it would just be like the entire world accepts Western values except the Middle East. I don't think that's true at all. I think that the more populous countries like India and China would say, no, we do not accept the culture. We find a lot of the cultural values of the United States and the Western world to be degenerate. We think that we're not going to accept that. So I think that you mistake that. But even if we accept, and I don't, but if for the sake of argument, if we would say, fine, everyone will be on board, 80% of the world's on board, now it's just the Islamic countries, like, you do realize that if you force this upon them, like, for example, if you go into these countries, if you go into Iran and you say, like, nope, the hijabs, you can't enforce that anymore, you're going to see an uptick of terror attacks. You would agree with that?
We would have to deal with the radical Islamic element in order for it to work, yes.
And what do you do when you have, like, caliphates like in Iran that potentially have nuclear weapons? Then what? Or that are close to getting nuclear weapons, or certainly, let me rephrase that. They don't have nuclear weapons. They have weapons of mass destruction. Like, they have chemical, biological agents. This could literally, in my estimation, this would lead to horrific amounts of death to force this upon them in an immediacy, like you're suggesting via globalism.
Like I said, I would want to integrate the Islamic countries in last for that specific reason.
Give me a time frame.
In order to set it up, so I would integrate the United States and Europe first, because we are the most socially compatible whenever it comes to politics. Then I would probably go with like certain developed countries in South America and like South Africa, and then move into like India and China.
Okay,
Russia's probably going to be a problem, but like
there's going to be a lot of problems. I don't know how you accomplish this without war.
I mean, like theoretically speaking, like we're already on the verge of World War III. This would be more something that happens after that, anyways.
Oh my goodness! No! So in order for your plan to work, we must first have World War III?
I mean, we're going to end up having World War III in the next decade, regardless of my
I think
plan
that's
or not.
quite the pessimistic view. I think in everything, what we'd see is probably more proxy wars. Like you'd see a situation like Israel-Iran fighting, or I'm not saying it's not possible, it certainly is, but we can see the way that the great powers have been going to war since the end of the Cold War is through proxy. The United States, or, you see Russia, Ukraine a proxy for sort of the NATO countries. You see United States, Syria, or the UN in Libya. I don't know that we're going to see a great war in the next 10 years. And I would say that it's very pessimistic if you're giving a worldview that in order for your worldview to happen entails World War III happening, which best case scenario would be millions dead, if not the end of the world. Because a scenario now where there's actually countries going to war and the equivalent if they have in past world wars, when there were so many countries armed with nuclear weapons, it's a very bleak future. So I fail to see the optimism in sort of your push for globalism that starts under the premise of, but we need World War III in the next 10 years to accomplish this.
Well, the only reason I say it's likely that we would have to wait until after World War III is because that we could theoretically make the UN into what I'm talking about, but there is one major obstacle in doing that, and that's we would have to get rid of the United States and Russia's majority voting power, and
that's going to be
Russia's not going to give that up. And even if I don't think the United States would want to give that up anyways.
That's exactly my point. That's why point 2 is that I made my opening statement was, or maybe it was point 3. I forget the order I did them in, that this transition would require World War III. You concede that.
Yeah, which I think is an inevitability anyways.
I mean, you're going to have a real tough road to hoe winning this debate when you've conceded that your position is World War III. I'm going to go against World War III. So I'm going to go against an attempt at globalism to get to World War III. I mean,
my position is more so institute globalism after World War III to prevent things like that in the future. Because, like I said, the way that I'm seeing world events occurring right now is it's going to happen in general. There's nothing that we can do to stop it. It's already going to happen, and just like the UN was established to prevent it, in a very feeble attempt to prevent it, obviously, because the UN is fucking toothless. We would need to actually establish a global government in order to prevent another world war in the future.
I don't think that, I'm not saying that it's impossible that we don't end up in World War III in the next decade, but I fail to see that you're 100% right with certainty, right? So let me ask you this. Hypothetically, if there isn't going to be World War III in the next 10 years, so you could see into the future and there is no World War III in the next 10 years, you still pushing for globalism?
I would still push for certain globalistic policies, like the ones that we have where we do the treaties. I think we need to do better enforcement on those, because for the most part right now, because the global government is useless, at minimum I would say we would need to actually establish Interpol as a global police force, like it should be and is in a lot of the world, just not here in America. And we would also need to actually establish the ICC as actually having power, because it's currently fucking useless.
Okay, so then would it be fair to say that you would not advocate for globalism, right? Because that's not globalism. It's at least not near what you would define it as, sort of a one world government. That's just status quo with two small exceptions. One, the ICC would have power to enforce shit in the United States because we currently don't accept it. And second, Interpol would have power to enforce shit in the United States because we currently don't accept it. But that's not globalism.
Well, it wouldn't have it just in the United States. It would need to have
right. But the big impediment at this point is the United States to those two organizations.
The Russia's a big impediment to it as well.
Fair enough. Yeah. United States and Russia. To me, that's, I guess then that the prompt should be that you can see globalism is not a good idea unless there's World War III predating it. And you would concede that without World War III predating it, an attempt to move to the globalism you're suggesting would in fact trigger World War III.
It kind of depends, but it could end up triggering World War III. Like I said, it would have to be done. It would have to be done very carefully and very democratically, which the United States is not good at. So we would have to
and neither would be Russia, neither would be China, and neither would be pretty much any country other than the Europeans.
Damn, I hate defending China, and you keep making me kind of. China's actually fairly good at democratic relations.
No, I don't think so. Think of how this would work. For example, you would want climate change agenda, right? And the Europeans would want it, and arguably a lot of the United States would want it, correct?
Yeah. Do you know what the country that has done?
China's not going to accept that.
No, China.
Neither's India.
China is literally the country in the world that has actually done the most to reduce their CO2 emissions in the past few years.
Well, that's because their emissions are so grotesquely worse than every other country's, right? They're building. Did you know that something like, now don't quote me on this, but a huge percentage, like over 90% of all coal plants being created in the world are being created right now in China?
It's not a statistic I'm aware of.
I'll check. Don't quote me, but I know that they create a ton of coal plants. Unless something dramatically has changed since the last time I looked at this.
I know China has also had a massive push towards using renewable energies like solar power, wind power, and water and all that. And the United States, at least recently under Trump, is starting to move away from that push that we were having here in the United States.
So right now, China, 83%, and again, this is a quick search, a brave search, 83% of all coal plants in creation right now are from China. 16% are India. All other countries, are you ready for this? All other countries combined, 1%. I mean, they're not going to give up. Like, if you go India, it's actually really crazy. Like, life expectancy in India in the past 20 years has shot through the roof. And the reason is because they have a rudimentary energy grid. And if you look at pictures of India, it's crazy. Like, they just basically have like diesel generators running. If you look at them and say, look, real quick, let me finish. If you look at them and you're like, listen, this is gross. You're putting all these emissions into the air, blah, blah, blah. You're going to literally kill off like millions of people in India, unless you have a forced transition. The problem is, if we accept globalism as what you're suggesting, that transition would take decades. And so they're not going to accept it. They're just not going to. And I'm even being generous in giving you this much to even go this. They're not going to accept it. They're not going to give up a loss of sovereignty. It's going to require either economic coercion that's going to lead to sanctions where hundreds of thousands of millions die of starvation, or it's going to require war. And you've already admitted as much earlier. You're like, yeah, I can't think of a situation where these places give up sovereignty without basically forcing them through a barrel of a gun. It's going to be World War III. And you've admitted it once. I don't know why you can't just say, yeah, that's probably the case. I mean, I know why you can't admit it, because you've lost the debate, but...
So when it comes to them, as you mentioned, their power grid is for both Russia and China is kind of shit.
India, China.
Oh yeah, India.
I was talking India. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but India was what I was talking about.
Fair. Russia's is probably shit as well, but
it may be. They probably have nuclear stuff there. My guess is right. Like they have a robust nuclear program, so.
Yeah, but in order for them to actually continue their industrialization for both China and India, they kind of have to build more coal plants. Like, as much as we don't want them to, like, there's no way for them to modernize their power grid without building coal plants and fossil fuel, using more fossil fuels, at least in the short term. Ideally speaking, we would want them to also build like hydroelectric plants and wind farms and solar farms and things like that, so they can modernize their electric grid and then also start to shift towards renewable energy. But that's something that would have to be done one at a time. Like, they would have to modernize their electric. It would.
And I just don't think that they'd be willing to accept it, because what you'd be talking about, if we enforce some climate agenda, their standard of living would go down in the meantime, so much so that you'd be unwilling to accept it. And I can't blame them for being unwilling to accept it. I just think that I just think you're off base, and they wouldn't accept this change of sovereignty. I mean, I think I've said my piece on why the transition would be bad and lead to war. But go ahead, I'll give you the final thought on it, and then we'll move on.
I would actually say that there would be some certain exceptions to like the climate policies, like where in the case of like India or China, or like what we would inevitably have to do with most of Africa and most of South America and Central America to modernize their power grids, those would be exceptions, because in order to modernize their power grids, we would have to build the plants in order to get their power grids up to modern standards. And then after that happens, then we would want to transition them towards renewable energy sources. So we would have to do the modernizing their power grid first and then move them towards.
I just think that it's a pipe dream, and I just think that both in this climate change, that's just one issue. There is a litany of issues that these countries won't accept a loss of sovereignty. But I want to ask you something. That's sort of the transition debate. I think that we could see that it's likely to lead to World War III. Even you admit that there's a good possibility of it. So, I think that I'm correct on that transition issue. I do have a question, though, another general question to lay a groundwork. Do you think that the government in the United States, where you're a U.S. citizen, I assume, right? I don't want to rush at you. Do you think the government here is corrupt?
Yes, I do.
Do you think, presumably you don't mean just Donald Trump. You've probably thought that for some years, even before Trump.
I think anybody in the government that gets into the government with any way other than a grassroots running, like Thomas Massie, I'll name a Republican first.
How about that?
Or AOC, or anybody that's gotten into the federal government via grassroots means is corrupt, because they're more what's the word I'm looking for? The corporations own them. I'll just say it that way. The corporations that got them into power own them.
Listen, dude, you're preaching to the choir largely, so we're not in disagreement there, which is one of the reasons I like talking to people on the left, because I think corruption is one of the issues I focus on most. So, hey, man, be happy to have you on the stream someday talking about like what we both see as corruption. Would you agree with me that the majority of the people in our political system, at least at the national level, we're not talking like your school board and shit, but at the national level, would fall into that category of being controlled by other people, corporations, lobbyists, etc.?
The vast majority, including some of the members of the Supreme Court, yes.
Okay. Do you think that that's less of a problem as you get more localized? So in other words, your town or your city where you live, there's probably less of a chance that those people are corrupt, at least in the way you're...
In certain cities, there are cities like New York or Chicago, or...
Because the money and the high profile, it's a little different.
Yeah, where you'll get corrupt people like Andrew Cuomo, who's currently going up against Mamdani, and Mamdani keeps throwing that in his face every fucking time, every debate, because he's corrupt as fuck.
Why would it be any different in a globalist system? Why wouldn't that just make things so much worse?
Because one of the ways that a lot of governments around the world prevent that is they don't have what we have, which is Citizens United, where corporations are considered people. The big issue when it comes to American corruption, whenever it comes to money in politics, is Citizens United and the fact that we consider corporations to be people.
But the problem is going to be twofold, right? There's only two possibilities, and I think both of this is going to subvert your message of globalism. There's only two ways that eventually we would get to a global system where we have this sort of global parliamentarian system. The first is, and the best case scenario by far for you, is that the United States leads the way, gets a coalition of people like from Canada, Europe, then gradually brings in other places like South America. Somehow we don't end up in war as we apply pressure and coercion to countries like Russia, China, India, etc., and then ultimately build a coalition that the rest of the world has to go on. I've already articulated why I think that transition would be horrific anyways. But in that scenario, you need the United States to lead. And presumably, as the United States leading, and the same with a lot of these Western countries that also have corruption. I mean, if we start to look into the Brussels and things like that, you would be shocked to find that, drum roll please, the people that have the biggest amounts of money and power behind them are the ones that often win. That's what that system would look like. The corrupt people that are running the United States government, the lobbyists, the corporations, etc., they're not all of a sudden going to cede power when the United States is shaping the world government. And of course, the other scenario is the United States forces people at the point of a gun. Same problem. Then the people running the United States are inherently corrupt as you speak. What would happen would be those lobbyists that you've conceded at the more local level have less power because there's less strength in those sort of local governments, but have more power in the national government. Oh boy, now they have the most powerful government, the world government. It would be ran by Microsoft. It would be ran by NVIDIA. It would be ran by corporations. They would install their people. You can't by fiat say, no, this system would not allow a Citizens United type thing, because the very people creating the system would be the rich and powerful. And they're going to set up a system. And by the way, this is what they want. That's why so many of their policies are pushing for globalism. They see the benefit. This system benefits them. So you can be damn well certain that they're going to be installing their people at the positions at the top, which means it's not going to be the utopia you seek. It's actually going to be tyranny by these corporations and powerful people, and that the voices that you want to actually have a voice, those like Mamdani or people like Thomas Massey or low-level grassroots politicians. By the way, I don't agree with you on Mamdani and whatever, but nonetheless, you see my point. Those people aren't going to have a seat at the table.
So actually, I don't really see the United States being the one to lead the way with this. I actually see the United States as one of the countries being an obstacle, because we already see this already starting to form with the formation of the EU, where the EU is a smaller example of what I want to see, which is why I use it as an example in my opening. The United States not wanting to give up its power and Russia not wanting to give up their power is actually why I see the United States and Russia being two of the biggest obstacles when it comes to creating a global government. There are certain countries or companies, like you mentioned, that are pushing for certain globalistic policy or light globalism policies because they do see it as beneficial, where you get the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which I actually praise, which even as a socialist, I actually praise Donald Trump for shutting down, because that was a fucking terrible trade deal. Or you get NAFTA. When you are doing light globalism policies like that, that does benefit corporations. But when you have the less corrupt countries, which, don't get me wrong, there is corruption in Europe. You've brought up Brussels. There's also Frida Italy, or whatever it's called, in Italy. The fucking grandchild of Mussolini's MSI.
You're just pointing to right-wingers, right? That's all.
Well,
I think there's a lot of left-wing corruption. Let's just take a country that's sort of like what countries would you say are most like the United States? The two I always think of is Canada and the UK. Would you say that's fair?
I actually think that the United States at this point is closer to Russia because we're very rapidly moving towards an oligarchy, which is
Okay, let's nip this in the bud. If it's true that the United States would be an impediment to this, then you definitely have to concede that it's World War III. Why would the United States, the most powerful military and wealthiest country in the world, with still the most cultural influence, acquiesce to giving up their power, especially when you're admitting that they're an oligarchy ran by corrupt people?
it would take a lot of reform in the United States in order to even get to this point.
Okay. So, okay. Well, whatever. I just don't think that it's possible. I think that our system would be better suited to having good reforms in the United States that don't lead to globalism rather than saying that the necessity for globalism. But let's take the UK, just for an example. It's a country I know just a little about. Now, I'm a redneck from rural Pennsylvania, so I don't know that much about countries around the world. But do you think the UK is corrupt?
Not in the same way that the U.S. is. There's
Well,
probably some corruption in the UK, but they don't allow for money in politics the same way that we do. So I wouldn't say
the lefties would disagree with you massively. They think that they've seen massive corruption against labor, that labor's sold out, that, you know, and the righties feel the same way. They feel that they were lied to about Brexit. They think the Tories lied to them. Like, yeah, the population may not think it's as corrupt, but certainly big money and influence and who you know and all of these things certainly affect politics in the United Kingdom. And even more to the point, the accusations of corruption in Brussels, where the EU's headed, is immense. I don't understand how you magically think, like, we're talking about, would you acknowledge this? Like, I don't know the exact number, but would you acknowledge that a single company like Microsoft, if we just took the wealth of Microsoft in a year, would put it in like the top 20 if it counted as a country as far as GDP? It'd be some ridiculous number like that, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Microsoft is like one of the most profitable companies in the world.
So how are you keeping them from getting a seat at the table?
You would have to do what we need to do here in the United States, which is ban corporations from.
But who's going to do that
donating
without
money
international law? The problem that you have is it's the sort of the same problem that you have with communism, right? It's like, well, we need like moral, strong, great people to seize control, take power, and then lay this groundwork for this system. Here is the world constitution, and then all we have to do is follow that constitution. That'll solve this problem. The problem is, whoever it is that's going to seize power or write this constitution, those people aren't beholden to an international constitution right now. That's why the need to create it. And that means that the people with the most power are the most likely to get a seat at the table. Why would they willfully write themselves out of power? You think that like they're going to pay for people to sit at the seat and actually start writing this constitution, intentionally screwing themselves over? There's not a chance. There's a reason that they're pushing for this global system, because they know that it will benefit them. Just like they know that the more big government we get in the United States, the more ability they have to influence and have favorites played for them. It would be magnified tenfold if you did it at the world government level. There's no getting around this. I don't know. I don't know possibly how you could just be like, no, we'll all say we've had enough. That's not true. For example, let me give you an example. You talked, for example, about Iran and them like having a riot, or I don't know if riot, maybe peaceful protest, whatever, over a woman and like women's issues, right?
It was not peaceful.
Okay,
It was not peaceful.
I'll bet you, there's an over 80% chance that was astroturfed by the United States. I'll bet that we help facilitate that through our intelligence agencies. We do it all over the place.
Considering the CIA's history, there's a very strong possibility that we instigated that.
Now, here's the thing with color revolutions, right? The reason Mike Benz talks about this a lot. You see, the CIA and our intel agencies were some of the first groups that pushed for a free and open internet. And that's because they realized something. When you go to these countries that are antithetical to the United States in the interest of the U.S. intel agencies, having free and open internet allows U.S. intel agencies to have freer access to the people of those countries to disseminate information that's critical of the people in power in that particular country. So you could go into a place like Cuba and you created a fake Twitter called Zunzania, right? And with Zunzania, it was put as it's just an app about weather and about pop music. And then the intelligence agencies in the US intentionally pushed to subvert in order to change the minds of the population of Cuba. And the truth is, we're all susceptible to this propaganda. And you know this, and I know this. Even us, ourselves, we're not better than other people, right? That's why we're limited to who we watch based on an algorithm on a place like YouTube. In other words, whoever could get their message out there ends up being messages that are more likely to be accepted. Well, the people that could get their messages out there are those with power, money, connections. There's no way that this wouldn't be the case with sort of a global government. It would run into the same problems. The difference is right now, there's a check and balance on that. There's hundreds of countries with hundreds of laws. And if some company like Microsoft buys off enough politicians in the United States, countries in Europe could say, no, we're not going to buy that. But if it's just one government that you need to buy off, the inevitable result would be that we would see the powerful rise to the top of that. And inevitably, we'd see more of a consolidation of money into the hands of the wealthy, siphoned off the middle of the class. And what we would see is the world would become haves and have-nots. The middle class would all but be eroded. The best way to stop that is smaller government, both at the national level and certainly not by embracing the impulses of globalism.
Depends on what you mean by smaller government. For the most part, I kind of agree, but also kind of disagree. I think we need to get rid of the way that we allow the military-industrial complex to influence America. That is a great.
With you.
Because the way that the military, when it comes to America, the biggest problem that we have in general is the money and politics aspect. Now, when you talk about globalism, this is something that would have to be done over decades in order to actually do it properly. It's like, it's not something that could happen overnight. It's not something that could happen within the next decade unless there is World War III, as we kind of already established. In the process of doing that, we would have to do a lot of reforms here in America in order to get America to a better place. And I'm not just talking about things like universal healthcare. I'm more so talking about things like issues to curb the corruption, like getting rid of Citizens United, like banning super PACs, things like that.
But let me ask you this: given that I hate to do this, but given that the wording, the prompt was, let me get the exact wording, lest we have some confusion. The prompt was, do you know what it is specifically, SpeakeaZy? I'm looking here at this.
Yeah, we should expand towards a global government.
It sounds like what you're suggesting is perhaps at some time in the future, but your answer would be the prompt implies like beginning now, and it sounds to me that you're conceding. First, we've already conceded the World War III being but it sounds like you're conceding that no, we shouldn't expand towards the global government now. We should make reforms and then start to expand. So that would seem to suggest the answer to the prompt is no, we shouldn't do it until certain other metrics are made, even in your estimation.
I think we're already expanding towards a global government in certain ways. I think it would be possible for Europe to then also ally with Canada for a global government, to ally with like New Zealand and Australia. Like there are countries that we could move towards a global government, but I don't necessarily think that the United States is in a position to participate in that. My view on a global government, while I did bring the United States, like the way that the United States is set up into it, I don't necessarily think that the United States would be a leader in pushing for this, nor should it be.
Okay, so I think that the two of the three main points I wanted to argue, I've made the point I want. I think that it's currently ran by corrupt people, our government, and world governments like we see in Brussels and the governments we see around the world. And I think those people would entrench their power even more, that would screw us over. And I think that the transition would be horrific and lead to millions dead in a situation like World War III. I guess the other part to talk about is the cohesion aspect of it. Now, we already sort of tangentially talked about this where it's like, gay rights, LGBT, women's rights. Let's take something far more benign, seemingly, but I think equally, in fact, I think more important. Now, you would say that the United States, inevitably what you'd like to see, even if they're not a leader, is the start of this would be the United States combining with countries like Canada, European countries, etc. Correct?
Yes, that would be a massive step in towards it.
How would we resolve the Second Amendment?
That is a good question. Like I kind of mentioned earlier, I would say that we would still need to have individual constitutions, which you said we probably don't know. Neither of us probably know a whole lot about individual constitutions, but I actually know a lot about my state's constitution, which is Ohio, right next to you. We're not that far
okay,
away.
a fellow. I have a lot of friends in Ohio, so that's great to hear. So
Yeah. So like we have like the abortion protections in our constitution. We have the very poorly done anti-gerrymandering protections in our constitution. These are both very relevant issues here right now in America, because we.
But
obviously don't
if
need to
I
go into
may,
that,
but the problem with that, so let's just take that one by one. The abortion protection. So you'd say, well, see, the abortion laws are different in Ohio than they are across the rest of the world. But here's the problem with that. That's only because the federal government hasn't weighed in. Roe v. Wade actually took the rights away from the state and actually was anti-democratic by having a non-elected justices decide it. Once that was overturned in the Dobbs decision, it went back to the states. So the federal government says nothing about abortion. Okay, it goes to the states. But that's not the way a one world government would go on an issue like the Second Amendment. There's a 0% chance that there wouldn't be some sort of federal or global law restricting your gun rights. I mean, that would be an issue that they would weigh in on. So us saying, much like Ohio has their own constitution, the United States globally would have its own constitution when it came to a global government, and it would allow the Second Amendment. Not so. Not if the world government says, nah, dog, you don't get to own a gun. Now what?
I mean, like I said, I think that the Constitution is like the final say when it comes to law. And unless they baked gun right or like gun control into the global constitution, like it wouldn't necessarily be a problem. So, like, even whenever it comes to like the United States, where like marijuana, for example, where this is an example of like where state laws supersede federal law. Like technically the DEA can still come in to like Ohio or Pennsylvania or whatever and raid dispensaries for money. And like when there have been bad dispensaries doing shady practices, they have actually done that. But it's not for the reason of like marijuana is federally illegal, therefore you can't have marijuana in the States. It's because those dispensaries were doing the shit that they shouldn't, therefore they were punished by the federal government.
That's not going to be analogous to what we're talking about. There's a reason that there's so much gun restriction in governments around the world, and that's because they don't want their population to have access to these. Now, you've already said that this global system would have free movements of people, correct?
Yes.
So there's 0% chance that given the free movements of people, with most of the world already saying that their population isn't allowed to arm themselves, that they're going to be okay with the U.S. citizen owning an AR-15 and being able to freely travel across the border to Canada. I mean, you could say, well, Canada could take your gun there, but the problem would be too profound. They would just say no. We say that there's not. We're not going to leave it up country to country what weapons they're allowed to have. In fact, this would be anathema to the whole project. This would mean that theoretically then Israel would say, okay, fine, we'll disarm. And Iran would say, not us. Our people are allowed to have guns. You can quickly see the problem. And so I just I don't think that the analogy to marijuana laws would apply when we could already, no analogy needed. We already see what European countries and what Canada thinks of gun ownership. We see what Australia thinks of gun ownership. So why would it be if these people have far more of a voice? Because remember, the United States is only 350 million people out of like 8.3 billion in the world. If the majority of the world says no gun ownership, they're going to enforce that on the United States. And I can't think of a scenario where the people of the United States willfully give up their guns to international police. It's going to cause bloodshed of epic proportions in the United States.
The way that I would say that we should probably handle that are with reforms that I think we should actually institute here in the United States anyways, would be like a federal gun registry. Look, I am for the Second Amendment. I am far left. It's the whole thing of you go far enough left, you get your guns back.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean that I don't think that we need certain protections. Like I think that we need licensing to own a gun. I would say like do a licensing system similar to like getting your driver's license. And then you just have to show your license to buy a gun, because you would have to get the background check in order to get the license. I also think we need to do a gun registry, a federal gun registry. And then I would say mental health checks.
But again,
I would say probably have every 6 months. And I would say like to the extent of like, that's like the extent of what the federal government really should do.
But you understand that may be what you think they should do, but you have no proof that's what they will do. And by giving the world government the right to tell people in individual countries like the United States, no, you no longer have a Second Amendment, you can see the problem. And that's just one issue in one country. Let's go even further. How about the First Amendment? Do you think Europe respects the right to free speech?
To an extent.
That being used to the people being locked up in the UK for memes right now.
Europe's approach to free speech is actually a lot closer to my opinion whenever it comes to free speech, which is free speech is okay, but hate speech is not.
Well, I disagree. I think our founding fathers made the First Amendment for a reason. And I think the fact that we're having a conversation right here is a very good thing. And I think once you start to get into this game of hate speech, it's quick to see how this runs afoul. For example, in a different world, maybe envision this. Close your eyes and envision this for a second. Imagine a world where there's a pandemic and all of a sudden we're told that we can't say certain things about it online. Oh shit, that happened 5 years ago. Right? So the idea, or maybe we can't question certain election results. And you could quickly see how perhaps if we had a world of government, we wouldn't be allowed to question certain military interventions. Imagine if this power existed in the United States under George W. Bush and said, you know what? You can't criticize our intervention into Iraq. We'll censor you. We'll arrest you. This is tyranny by another name. So no, I don't think that I'm willing to accept that it's something that I think is very valuable. And one of the most valuable things written in our Constitution, that we have free speech. And the idea of that is to protect even speech that is hateful. In fact, that's the entire point of it. I don't think we should cede that, particularly when I think that I'm winning, that the likely people that are going to be in charge of this globalist government are going to be corrupt, wealthy people that want to maintain their hegemony over power. All of a sudden, they'll quickly say, you don't have free speech to criticize us. It's enshrined in our Constitution. We can see right now, for example, that the European Union's trying to fine places like X billions of dollars for not removing things on that social media platform that they dislike. Who's to say that who's elected someone that says, and we find socialists to be abhorrent and they must be silenced online? What would you do? It's written into the global constitution. You now no longer have a voice. At least here, under this constitution, you have the right to speak. But you have no guarantee that would be the case if we remove free speech rights.
I mean, there's the example of like Germany, where you brought up X. Like there was a big issue between Germany and X a while back because X doesn't filter out Nazi content anymore. So there was that big ass lawsuit about that between the two. I am of the opinion that Germany was in the right there.
Well, I think we
So-
should censor communist. Now what? I think communists led to more deaths than the Austrian painter guy did. So now what?
I mean, there are certain valid arguments for censoring certain far left views as well.
You agree with that? You think we should censor communists?
Uh, I'm actually not for communism. I strictly stay at socialism for a
But
reason.
that wasn't the question. Should we censor communists?
People like Hassan and shit. Yeah, there are certain communists that I would say what we should censor.
Donald Trump and his administration thinks Mamdani's a communist, so he should be censored as well, right?
I would say that we should use the actual definitions of things.
Trust me.
Is not calling Mamdani a communist is actually kind of retarded.
The people in power and enforcing the hate speech law disagree with you. Now what are you going to do? Protest? You're not allowed. That's hate speech. And by the way, you don't have any weapons anyways because the government took them away from you. Now what are you going to do?
One of the bigger problems that we come into with laws, at least here in America, is like the vague phrasing of things, which is why the Supreme Court is always so fucking busy, is because we phrase things so vaguely. I would say, like, when we establish the global constitution, one of the things that we need to do is be like, when it comes to free speech, when it comes to gun rights or anything like that, we would need to be very specific to prevent people from skirting around those things. It's the same way that the fact that we weren't very specific with the Fourth Amendment allowed for things like the Patriot Act to curb the Fourth Amendment.
Okay, I'll just say this. I think I make my point with social cohesion. Certainly, this is just the most narrow definition of countries that seemingly agree, like the United States and Europe. You can imagine how far it runs afield when you're talking about such as an African country disagreeing with policies that would be set forth in a place like Brussels. The social cohesion would be unbelievable. There would be violence. There would be people just refusing to accept stuff. But there is one more area that I'd like to get to, if you don't mind. Like, what do we do about this idea in the United States? We're both incredibly lucky to live here. You would agree with that, right?
Yeah, for the most part.
I mean, what are we going to do, seeing as how we're so wealthy? We're certainly going to be a net payer into taxation, and we're not going to get near as much out of our taxes as we do currently, because almost all of it's going to be sent to poor countries like Africa, correct?
Well, I mean, we really don't get jack shit out of our taxes right now in the first place, because most of it goes to the military and foreign intervention. So
let's reframe the question, if you don't mind. Then the United States makes up 350 million people. If we took the median income of those people, it's going to be amongst the top of the people in the entire world, correct?
Yeah, probably.
Would you not say that the rest of the people in the world would vote in the Constitution and be like, give me some of that shit? It's not fair that they're making so much money and we're not.
It's more than likely that we would have some forms of social democracy, which, yes, just like here in America, where poorer states tend to be the ones that pull from the social safety net more. Like if we look at food stamps and stuff, the South tends to be the ones that pull from it the most, like Alabama, Mississippi, etc. It's more likely that countries like Africa would, or the countries in like Africa or South America would end up being the ones that need the most help.
And it's nowhere near this difference of like in the United States, people in Alabama compared to people in New York. We're talking worlds different. People in the United States compared to people in Zimbabwe, correct?
Yeah.
Don't forget about the comments. We'll get to that later. Don't read them. It's all distraction, man. Trust me. Yeah, I mean, so I think that what you're trying to sell, at least here from a US-centric perspective, is a sharp decline in our way of life. And in fact, not only that, if everyone has free movement, then, and there's no such thing as US citizenship at that point, much like the states is what you're saying, I could move to Ohio and be an Ohio citizen. There's nothing necessary, no test, no swearing of allegiance, anything of that nature, right? Like, then people just sort of become interchangeable, right?
To an extent, yeah. I mean, it would, the world would effectively become a melting pot just like the United States has.
And don't you think that there's like some danger in that when we're taking people out of places that they have ancestral connections to, not just from the perspective of like Europeans, but Africans, like Japan? No more Japan for the Japanese, Africa for the African, no more of that. Everybody's just an interchangeable cog. The company you work for says, hey, you're going to go work in Brussels this month, and then next month you're heading to Japan. Then after that, you're going to be in South Africa. And we all just accept that we move around like interchangeable cogs to help out these wealthy corporations. You don't see that as like a dystopian nightmare?
While I think we should, like, in the process of doing this, I do think that we should give some effort towards preserving cultures. Just like the United States, I don't necessarily think that meshing cultures is a bad thing. There probably some bad things that have come out of it in the United States, yes. But overall, the experiment of the United States, the whole melting pot shit in the first place, has been mostly successful.
Last point here, like, come on now, right? You don't think that immediately once we have free movements of people that you're not going to have millions of people in poor countries and say, I'm going to move to the United States, they have better infrastructure. And if that's the case, how the hell do we preserve culture?
Do you want to answer that before we get into closing?
I do think to an extent that you would see people in poorer countries wanting to move here, especially people that want to have more opportunity. But that's why we would need to expand towards industrializing those poorer countries rapidly in the first place.
Alrighty. Well, thank you. First off, both of you. That was absolutely amazing. I always say the best debates is when the moderator doesn't have to step in. You know, those are always the best. Both people being completely good faith. So shout out to you for that, both of you. So we're gonna get into the 5-minute closing statements here. So the way we do it, Vigilante, you had the first word, so we're gonna give Rob the last word. So you're gonna start with the closings here. I'm going to get the timer up for you. And whenever you're ready, I'll start up here 5 minutes whenever you start talking. And quick reminder, both debaters' channels are in the description. So if you guys want to find them, go to the description of the live and you'll find them there.
Right. So yeah, I can understand the concerns whenever it comes to social cohesion. Whenever I was writing my opening statement initially, one of the things that came into my mind was like the issue of the Islamic countries, because whenever it comes to social cohesion, like I've mentioned many times, I do see the Islamic countries as being the biggest problem, mostly, not necessarily the people, mostly the governments and the extremist elements, just like we have issues with certain extremist Christian elements here in America, like the Westboro Baptist Church, for example. Extremist elements are always going to be a problem, no matter what government we have, whether it's a national government or a global government. I want to make it clear that whenever I talk about this, this is more of a long-term goal. It is not a short-term goal. Without fucking World War III happening tomorrow and then ending 5 days from now, it's not happening in the next year. It's probably not happening in the next decade. It's something that we're going to have to gradually move towards over time. It is absolutely an incrementalist goal to have.
I think he froze up, man.
Oh,
can you pause just so he has his time?
Vigilante.
Or he's thinking real hard.
He might have lost connection.
If you don't mind, I'll head to the restroom real quick.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Back. I'll be right back.
Yeah. He might have lost some connection here. Maybe they have to reboot into here. It happens. But while we're waiting, just a reminder to you all, we're going to be doing a 30-minute Q&A after the closings here. and super chat. Yep, there he goes. It's probably gonna load back in. That's all. So yeah, we're gonna do a 30-minute Q&A, but super chats are gonna get priority. So if we don't get to your question in the Q&A part, I apologize ahead of time, but the super chats do get priority for the questioning. And then after that, optional for both debaters to stay for this part. We're going to have an open panel where you guys can come up, ask both debaters about their stances, give your own, all of that. Just an open panel. But it's not going to be if you're coming up to Spurg or talk about drama or any of that shit, you're just going to get kicked. So none of that. Yeah, he got completely disconnected. I'm guessing he had to boot something back up.
Yeah. This is extra time for me. I just get to make my. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, he just messaged me, said internet dropped.
Yeah. I figured something.
What timing? Right in the closing statement.
Well, I mean, to make it fair, I suppose if he can't come back, I'll just give a 1 minute and 20-second closing statement. We'll call her Even Stevens. Okay.
There he is.
Sorry about that. Disadvantages of living in the middle of nowhere. Your internet drops sometimes.
Yeah.
No worries. I stopped the timer for you.
I'm sure Rob knows all about those issues.
It's true. I
put 5 seconds there for you.
All right. Fuck, where was I? What was the last thing that you guys heard?
Jeez. Let me think what you were saying. You were talking about like World War III. This wouldn't happen without that happening. It wouldn't happen for like the next 10 years or something like that.
Oh,
we're a long time away from this occurring without World War III setting in.
Yeah, incrementalism is where I was.
Okay.
Yeah. So as I said, this would be an incrementalist goal. It's not something that would happen overnight. You can't do world-changing policy overnight. It's more of a long-term wish list than it is we could do this right fucking now. Obviously, we can't do this right fucking now. It would be impossible to implement right now without World War III happening, kind of as Rob pointed out. Now, as I kind of mentioned, I do think that we should allow for the states in the global government to have some degree of independence. Similar to the level of independence that we have currently between states in the United States, where we have the state constitutions, and those state constitutions are enforceable whenever it comes to the federal courts. I think it was with the abortion rights in Minnesota, or I can't remember which state it was. There was a massive lawsuit where the state tried to pass very strict abortion laws, and the Supreme Court ended up shutting it down after Roe v. Wade was overturned because abortion rights were already codified in that state's constitution. I would say the way that we need to do things would be similar to that, where the state constitution, even if it conflicts with the federal law, is the absolute authority whenever it comes to local governments and state governments. Yeah, I probably had more, but trying to fix my internet kind of jogged my train of thought.
I know, worst timing. But thank you for that closing statement. And now we are going to hand it over to Rob for his closing statement. And Rob, whenever you're ready, I'll start the timer up with you.
Thank you. I basically made 4 areas at the onset of my opening statement, and I think that I do a pretty good job of making my case in all 4 of those. The first was, in the United States, our taxation would go to places that don't benefit us here in the United States, and in addition to that, it would precipitously lower the wealth of everyone in the United States. Quickly, you could see that people around the world would vote to raid the coffers of the people of the United States, if not just outright moving here and taking wealth that they never earned or created for themselves. This means that it would be immoral, not just for me, because me and my family immediately would lose money. But what about the fact that my children and my children's children would wake up in a country where their culture is dissipated, where people would move to wherever they saw fit, that where he would be a cog in a machine, and that the wealth that his forefathers fought for this great country, the greatest country in the history of the world, was given away. All of our authority and hegemony given away at the stroke of a pen. So that's the first argument. The second argument is there wouldn't be social cohesion. I think we see this pretty clearly. We focused a lot at the beginning on issues like trans issues, gay rights, women rights. I think that it's easy to see that people have different ideas around that around the world. In fact, I think that a lot of people, more than 50%, would have ideas that were much antithetical to what many of the progressives, and maybe someone like Vigilante, who might not identify as a progressive, would want these policies to be. And the way out of it would be very nebulous. Do you force these people through coercion to accept policies they wouldn't like? If so, then is this even a real form of democracy? If each country gets a vote based on the population of people there, it's easy to see how places like China, India, places in the Middle East, other countries of significance, Russia perhaps, would say, no, we're not going to accept what we see as sort of secular degenerate values that have inundated places like the West. We refuse to accept that. And then what would happen? Same could be true of green energy policies. But I even focus on countries that we think are more similar. Take an issue that's profoundly important to most Americans, such as First Amendment and free speech. This would be curtailed, as would be easy to see. What would happen? Of course, it's easy to say, no, we want to be like Europe, and we just say that hate speech is curbed. But who controls what is hate speech? Who controls what is truth? And if we don't have the right to defend ourselves outlined in the Second Amendment, what would we do if tyranny reared its head? Now the tyrannical would be the most god-awful force that you can imagine. A world government backed by world corporations. The tyranny would be immense. So the idea of social cohesion and countries being forced to come together under one government that have massively different cultural values, even countries that we think are markedly similar, like the United States, Canada, and the UK, you could quickly see how that cohesion would disrupt. And there would certainly be many people in the United States if you tried to take their guns away, in Islamic countries if you tried to force things that are secular upon them, that would lead to bloodshed, terrorism, etc. And again, eroding cultural values. My opponent says, well, we tried to maintain cultures. How? People are interchangeable cogs. Anyone could move wherever they want. The third reason is that the current group of people that no doubt would get into positions of power in what would be required to have this globalist system are corrupt. My opponent admits that. He says, yes, in the United States, we can see it corrupt, and maybe he's more hesitant to admit it, but I assure you there's corruption in countries such as European countries. There's corruptions in the European Union, corruption in places like NATO, etc. No doubt, if you had a world government, as we've seen with local governments, you're less likely to have the powerful get involved in the corruption. That would increase as you become more to a national government, and it would be insane, the amount of lobbying, control, etc., that these massive corporations that are larger than most countries would have in this global government. That means that the global government wouldn't be run by hippies that would have everyone's best interest at heart. No, it would be ran by the very tyrants that we would seek to avoid in the first place. And there'd be no check or balance on them because we just have one government, and if they control that one government and we only have one police force and one military, that's that. They now own the show. As I said in my opening statement, take the words of Orwell. Imagine that future. A boot stamping on a human face forever. In fact, 1984 shows what happens as we attempt towards globalism. In that case, you had Oceania and a couple other, I think there were 3 blocks, and you saw what happened. But easily, the most important way in which I win this debate, in my opinion, is the second point that I made, which is that the transition would lead to war. My opponent all but concedes this. Nigh impossible to win a position when your argument is that World War III is either a necessary precursor or a very likely scenario in playing out if you attempt these actions. It's quick to see how countries such as Islamic countries wouldn't accept this. I believe there's Islamic nuclear power countries like Pakistan, I believe. How you might have countries like Israel or China that wouldn't accept, and in my opponent's estimation, even the United States wouldn't accept. He concedes that this would likely lead to World War III. Whatever you think about the potential for globalism, it's key that now is not the time, and that if it's going to lead to World War III, it should be avoided. The prompt was, should we move to it, which implies, should we move now? My opponent outlines a bunch of precursors that would be necessary to make this project potential, and even then it could lead to World War III. This means that even he would have to concede that right now, no, we should not move to globalism. So I think for the reasons I outlined above, that you should prefer my side in this debate. Also, real quick, I'm sure we'll have time to talk about this, but thank you both. I had an immensely fun time, and it was very enjoyable to both of you. I'd be happy to have you moderate again in SpeakeaZy and Vigilante. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Regardless of what people think, the fact that we were able to get through a conversation with very little moderation, I think speaks highly of both of us. So I do appreciate that.
Yes,
Yeah,
I agree.
Oh
Sorry,
yeah,
go
for
ahead,
sure. And
Vijay.
I don't do I try to avoid theoretical debates like this, but for the most part, but I mean, easy asked and it's fun.
I had a good time. I did.
Yeah, I agree exactly with what you said. Is I always say that about debates. My chat's heard it a million times. The best debates I watch is when the moderator doesn't have to step in too much, or if at all. Those are the best. But this is going to wrap up the debate part of the show. And again, huge respect to both the debaters for coming up here and clashing their ideas. And make sure everybody in the chat shows both debaters love. Go to their channels, give them a sub if you're not subbed up, send them money, all of this. Okay. We're going to move into the audience Q&A portion here. So I'm going to read the questions from the chat. The super chats are going to be read first. If we don't get to the Q&A questions, again, I apologize ahead of time, but that's just how it works. Super chats get a priority. And then after that, we'll have a open panel. And this is optional to both debaters, and the audience can hop up, give their take of what they heard tonight, the prompt in general. So anyone who wants to join that, stick around for that, and we'll be doing that right after this 30-minute here. So let me get the timer up. Oh, wait, and I also sorry, I usually ask a question for each side too. Sure. Before we do the Q&A. So the first question here is for Vigilante's side. If the global government makes mistakes when it comes to the economic policy crashing and multiple nations, who would be actually accountable for all of that?
I mean, I would say just like here in the United States, it would be the government that would be accountable for it. I mean, it's usually the government's fault whenever we have an economic crash here in the United States. It would be the government's fault in a global government if and when we have an economic crash. That is unfortunately an inevitability whenever it comes to a free market system without proper protections in place.
Okay. Did you want to respond to anything to that, Rob?
Well, yeah, I think that the reason SpeakeaZy makes this point is, at least right now, if a country runs afoul, let's say that some strongman dictator comes to the United States and just is abusing people through use of power, there's at least a check-in that the rest of the world could theoretically not accept it and band together. There's none of that possibility if we only have one military, one government. I mean, if I could steelman your position, I think the answer to that would be, well, then you would have people uprise within this very government and country, perhaps other alternative military leaders, etc. But certainly it's a question that requires some serious thought. If we have a particular country now that gets corrupt, that gets incompetent, the check is there are other countries that theoretically this country doesn't have control over that could possibly be a check and balance. I don't know exactly how that would work in a one world government.
Well, we would want the military to swear its allegiance to the Constitution, similar to the way that we do here in the United States, where the military is that check, which is something that we see going on right now, where the military in certain places is basically telling Trump to go fuck himself.
Well, I mean, there's a question of who's right or wrong about that. Obviously, I'm probably going to have an alternative opinion to you.
Well, the point I knew you were going to disagree with me on on
Yeah,
like
that's fine. I see your point
that
though in general.
But like, there's a reason I brought that up because it's a relevant point to what we're dealing with now.
I would just say this. Is it not true that there's a second safety net rather than generals rising up that would be other countries not accepting it that wouldn't exist in the globalist system that you're suggesting?
I mean, there's the whole checks and balances. In general, I would want the same checks and balances that we have here in the United States. Which the reason it falls to the military right now is because if, God forbid, Trump did want to become a dictator, the Republicans own the state and the Senate and the House of Representatives. The Republicans own the fucking courts. The only check at that point right now is the military. So theoretically, yeah, you would want the state house and the courts to be able to check that as well. But like theoretically in like the scenario of like they're all the same fucking party like we have here in the United States, the military is the final check.
But what I'm saying is that's not the final check. It's a final check within this country, but there's a secondary check, which is the rest of the world could see this and not go along. That second level of check would no longer be possible in this global system, correct? That's all I'm saying. By the way, I don't think this is the best argument against your position, but it is an argument, right? There's a second safety net. What if the general, I don't agree with your characterization, but for the sake of argument, everything's controlled by Republicans, the courts, the culture, the only possible check's the military. But what if the military also goes along with Trump? And you're like, I still think he's corrupt. Well, one possible check after that would be, well, the rest of the world could say, no, you've gone too far. We refuse to accept this. But in a one world government, if the government goes too far and all of the branches go in the same way corruptly, what's the check?
I mean, so I would say the military is the check before the other governments.
Sure,
actually.
Agreed. But if...
I mean, that's why I would want, I mean, for what you're saying, that's why I would want people to still be able to...
It's the equivalent of saying this. If I said, well, if I get in a wreck, my seatbelt's my primary safety device. But there's a secondary device of the airbag... And you could be like, yeah, but it's important to have a robust seatbelt. Agreed. Yet there's a second level. That would be the other countries are the equivalent of the airbag here. It's like, right. And it's fine if you say, I just trust the seatbelt to be strong and we would never need the airbag. I'm just saying that it's a potential argument. Yeah, hypothetically, if Trump becomes a tyrant, the military will stop him. But if your argument is, well, he subverted the courts, by the way, which I disagree with, and they're all on his side, why couldn't he do the same with the military, hypothetically? And if so, at least there's another check out there, hypothetically. Now, of course, your argument could be, well, he could be more powerful than all of that. The U.S. military could be more, maybe, but I'm just saying it's another potential check. That's all I'm saying. And I think you have to concede that, yeah, that level of check would be lost. I think the best argument for me would be like, yeah, but it doesn't really matter. And in fact, Rob, didn't you say that there could be individual violence that would pop up from sects of people around the world? So why couldn't that still be an equal check? If you're talking about how they could potentially cause violence, then wouldn't that violence theoretically be directed against a tyrannical government? Isn't that some form of check? Great argument, Vigilante. I agree. That would be a good argument for that. But I think I see what SpeakeaZy is getting to. If there's only one government and that government fucks up, there's not another government to say, hey, you fucked up, right? Like, I think that's the point he's getting to.
Yeah,
I mean, tyranny in general is possible in any system, unfortunately. It's human nature is the want for greed and power, which is literally why I'm no longer a communist and I'm just a socialist.
Good, you would have been outlawed in my one world government for being a communist.
But to your point about like other governments being a check, I think historically speaking, like world history speaking, the other governments really are never a check unless you pull what Russia's doing now and start invading other countries.
Well, World War I and II disagree with you. Like, right?
Well, World War II started because of Hitler invading Poland.
Correct.
So,
what'd the rest of the world say?
No, obviously.
Okay, now imagine that it was that same Austrian painter, but he's in charge of the world government.
I mean, that was his goal in the first place.
Well,
Yeah,
you're
that was
paving an
kind
easy
of the
path.
point of the question. Yeah,
Right.
to kind of paint that. Yeah. So, I have a question for your side as well, Rob. So, like, say the system, like this global system, would prevent certain things that Vigilante mentioned, and it prevented, like exploited resources
Mhm.
and countries fight each other currently. If it did prevent this thing, do you still see a justification to not engage in this?
Well, yes, because I think that the preponderance of evidence shows that the cons far outweigh the pros. Now, it'd be silly to argue that any sort of change in government wouldn't have pros and cons. For example, possibly the best form of government would be an authoritarian dictatorship ran by a benevolent, competent person. It would take away all the government regress and the bureaucracy. And if this person truly cared about everyone and was the smartest person for the job, it could actually be mightily effective. Problem would be, how do you find that person? And what happens once that person's no longer in power? And what happens if it's not a competent person? What happens if it's an evil person? So you can quickly see why we need to hedge our bets and say, well, now wait a minute. Maybe we shouldn't put all the power in the hands of one person. Even if hypothetically, if someone like you said, but what if you could see that that person would cure all world disease? Well, yeah, I guess if you could see in a vacuum that utopia would come about because of an action, as unlikely as it may be, that maybe at that point it'd be worth going for that action. But we can't see into the future. And so what we have to look at is the preponderance of evidence. So certainly there are things that you could say would be better, hypothetically, that you could rationalize out. For example, we probably wouldn't see two countries going to war because there's not two countries. However, I think that the downside would be you'd see just as much death by violence. And even if there were small upticks in having cooperation in solving disease, I think that the fact that we would have unfettered migration, etc., would cause those things to spread even more. And then we would see all the negative effects that I'm talking about. So, in general, to answer your question, if I try to steelman it as best as possible, two things to say about it. One, if I could see in a crystal ball and the exact system Vigilante was advocating for led to some sort of awesome world utopia, would I still be against it? Well, probably not. I just don't think it would lead to that. And secondly, even if it's bad in all the ways I'm saying, could there be marginally things that would be better? Sure, there could be, but I think that the bad would far outweigh the good.
All right. And did you want to respond to that, Vigilante?
Nah.
Okay. All right. Again, thank you all for watching The Swords of Reason.
Step into the circle where the echoes collide. Truth through the static, no place to